Hello and welcome everyone. This is the first part of two introductory lecture in this course, Introduction to Western Political Thought. And in this lecture today we are going to basically discuss what is thought, what is political thought, how it is different from political philosophy and political theory, what are its subject matter, what are its significance, and what is its method. However, on method we are going to have one separate lecture in the next class, but today we will briefly discuss the basic approaches and methods to study political thought as well. And in the second part of the lecture today we are going to study the outline, the basic outline of the course, and the assessment and the evaluation process, and then before concluding we will discuss the references for this particular lecture as well. So, first of all I welcome you all in this course, and I hope over the course of 12 weeks we will discuss the major thinkers in Western political thought, and through them we will try to understand how political thought play a very significant role in not just the political discourse of our time, but also understanding those discourses and critically evaluating our own assumptions or suppositions about the politics. So, the study of political thought enables us to not just make sense of the world in which we live and how to improve that world, but also to critically reflect upon our own assumptions and approaches to politics. And over the course of 12 weeks we are going to discuss some of the major thinkers and the key themes which shaped the discourse of political science over the millennium. So, let us start with this idea of political thought and how to understand it. Is political thought different from say political philosophy or political theory, or political thought is something which is just unique to one particular tradition, or it is there in all societies, in all communities and in all tradition across the ages. So, if you look at the study of political thought as a systemic or systematic thinking and theorization about political problems, we find that it is as old as human society. So, from the very beginning the human society constantly tried to think about or reflect upon the collective problems they face and how to organize the collective life or manage the collective life have been the central issue in theorization or thinking about political problems. So, political thought is systematic thinking and theorization about the political problems, and as I have said that as a discipline or as a systematic thinking about the political problem, it is as old as human society, and its subject matter concerns with the common affairs of the whole society or community. So, what thought or what kind of thought and thinking we regard as the political thought, and there we have to distinguish political thought from say other kind of thinking and theorization. So, the subject matter or the concern of political thought is those issues, those problems which concerns the common affairs of the whole community. So, for instance, when we discuss about the order, how to maintain order in the society, and you can think of order as opposite to chaos or kind of anarchy. So, a decent life or a life which is secure or which can pursue whatever is desirable or dignified in the life require a form of society or in community which is well ordered, and how to ensure that order, how to have the ideal form of government. These are some of the core concern in political thought, and it distinguishes say for instance the concerns of the householder, or say a religious preacher, or those who are involved in other pursuits in life. The subject matter of political thinker is those political issue that concerns the whole community or the whole society. So, from the very beginning the question of order, state, government, sovereignty, legitimacy, citizenship and the role of politics have been the central distinguishing feature of political thinking and political theorization. So, in most of the societies from the very beginning we have different forms of state over the centuries and over the millennia. However, human beings or human communities began to organize or manage their life, and in organizing and managing their life they require a systematic thinking or theorization about the politics, and in doing that they develop certain language, certain modes of inquiry, and that modes of inquiry and thinking over the year constitute what we call political thought. And in this course we are going to discuss how this thought evolved from Greco-Roman times through the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle and Machiavelli, and then Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Hegel, Marx, Kant and Mill, that how over the millennia they theorize about these problems of order, state, sovereignty, citizenship, political obligation, and basically the role of politics. And we will also see in this course that the nature of the political is also something which is debatable. In a sense, there is no conclusive understanding about the political. So, as I have said that political thought and thinking revolves around the problem which concerns the political. But then what is the role of politics and political in society? So, we will see in this course over the next few weeks that how there are disputations on understanding this nature of political. Say for instance, for many scholars or thinkers, political thought is something which help us improve our collective life, and political is that mode which enables the human being, the community to better organize themselves, to live a decent life, to lead an ideal life. So, political for them is then independent or supreme issue or concern that governs the whole society or the whole community. So, in that sense political is seen as something which has its own autonomy, which has its own independence in thinking or theorizing about the issues that concerns the whole society. In contrast to that, there are many scholars and thinkers who argue that political is not the ultimate aim and objective of human life or the community. In fact, the grandeur than the political and more desirable than the political is the issue of salvation. So, the religious or the spiritual realization is more desirable than the political. So, political is in this kind of thinking and theorization subordinated to the religious or the spiritual modes of living and thinking about the salvation. And gradually in the ideological age there are multiple conceptions of politics. So, among the feminist, among the liberal, socialist or environmentalist, they have very different conceptions of politics which we will discuss over the course of 12 weeks. But to begin with, we have to understand the political thought or thinking as a systematic mode of inquiry about the issue that concerns the whole society or whole community is the subject matter of the political, and we will discuss over the course of 12 weeks. Now, how thought emanates? Is it something which is innate to the human nature or human society, or there is a kind of effort or a kind of approach which is needed to develop one's thought or a thought in the community. So, if we try to understand political thought in a much more systematic and rigorous way, we will find that the political thought emanates from the human capacity to reason. So, in that sense, a human being as a rational subject is capable of reflecting upon his or her circumstances, and that ability to reflect upon his or her circumstances and how to improve those circumstances, if one use the rational logical modes of inquiry in first making sense of or understanding about the circumstances and then the possibility of improving them, once individual involves in those kind of inquiry, thought originate and emanates out of that. So, thought in that sense, including the political thought, emanates from the human capacity to reason, to seek better answers. So, we have a given situation or a given circumstances. For many of us, that circumstances or the given society may not be ideal and far from ideal, may be chaotic, may be disruptive. Now, the challenge for political thinker and political thought, as we discuss in this course, is respond to those circumstances and provide the alternative or the better answer to the major questions of their time. So, for instance, when Hobbes was thinking, there was prevailing civil war in England, and there was a decay in Greco Roman society when Plato, Aristotle, Cicero and later on Machiavelli was thinking about new modes of politics. So, political thought, besides human capacity to reason, emanates from our innate search for better answers to the challenges that we face in our life. And ultimately, the political philosophy or the political thinkers that we will discuss are constantly trying to have the ideal order or the ideal state or the ideal government. So, overall objective in the political treatise or treatises of many political thinkers in the course which we have included is to form an ideal order, form an ideal state, and what are those ideals. And there we have to understand that political thought and politics in general deals with the question of ethics. And what is ethics is basically the idea of what is desirable or what is undesirable, what is good or what is bad. And in political thought and thinking, this idea of desirable or undesirable, good and bad is the central theme in any discourse on state, order, government, citizenship and so on. So, political thought in a sense then is in constant interplay of the moral and ideal and also what is called the pragmatic or the real. So, one of the lamentation against the political thought and thinking is that these are mere speculation or reflection of few thinkers in the classical antiquity or in the medieval times, which have very limited application in our times or in responding to the challenges that we face in say 21st century. So, why we should study political thought or worried about the reflection of the few thinkers and their treatises written in another times in another context, and more so when they deal with the ideal. And ideal you can think of the questions which leads us to think about or argue about what is ought to be rather than what is. And political science, if it is considered as a pragmatic science which deals with the real question, what is the reality, and then we try to respond to those reality or that given circumstances. However, in the political thought or political philosophy, there is the strong approach to think about the ideal, to think about the ultimate reality of society, state, individual, and how to realize them in this life. So, in political discourse or in political philosophy, we will see that how political thought is a result of this constant search or inquiry into this interplay of ethics and politics. So, the thought coming back to this question of that how thought emanates is from the human capacity to reason, the search for better answers, and also to find the ideal order in the given circumstances. And political thought most of the time is a result of these three things coming together, and we will see when we will talk about Plato, Aristotle, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, that how through rational approach they were responding to their circumstances, and in responding to their circumstances they were trying to create ultimate ideal kind of society or the state and so on. So, this then thinking and thought is not just unique to the few individual and a particular tradition of thought. In fact, we all are engaged in thinking in one way or the other. So, thinking or theorization is not something which is unknown to us. All of us constantly think about the repercussions of our actions, try to make sense of the world that surrounds us, try to understand or identify the major problems that we face as a collective groups or as a collective society or a nation state, and how to make the society state a better place to live in, so that it allow the ultimate dignified or decent kind of life. So, political thinking and theorization in that sense not something which is confined to only few individual, all of us are engaged in this approach. However, the difference is that most of us do not sustain our own reflection in a way as these thinkers have done, and that we will discuss in the second class when we will discuss about the classics and how to study classics. So, if the idea is, if all of us are involved in thinking, why should we give priority to say Plato, Aristotle and Hobbes? So, and if we all are rational, then what is the need of reading these treatises? The answer to these questions are to understand what are classics, and that we will discuss in the next lecture. But what makes us read these classics is their timelessness, is their relevance even in today. So, Plato wrote in the classical time in 3 or 4th century BC Greek, but his treatise on Republic makes sense even in the 21st century. So, the timelessness and the relevance and the approaches that they have to understand the political is something which makes them distinct from our own everyday sense of thinking and arguing about the politics. However, in this contemporary times, one must take note that most of us, especially in this era of constant bombardment of the information with this social media or new social media, as a species, human beings have become more as kind of responsive, and most of the time when we respond, when we like something or dislike something, when we share something, this response comes instantaneous. We hardly engage in thinking or cross checking, and there is result of those instances, likes, dislikes, sharing, is the circulation of the fake news, which becomes a major challenge and hinders or obstruct our understanding rather than revealing it. So, political thought and thinking is something which we all need to involve in. We constantly think about it. However, when we have a kind of systematic approach to our likes, dislikes, to understand our circumstances, requires a particular approach, and I hope over the course of 12 weeks, by engaging with these thinkers and their text, we will develop better capability to understand the circumstances in which we live and how to respond to them, and more than that, we will be able to understand our own assumptions and approaches to the politics of our time. So, political thought emerges out of our pursuits to answer how to better govern ourselves. So, this is the central question for any community or any society in any age, the question of governance and how to govern oneself. What is the ideal form of government? And thinking and theorization about that lead to many political treatises in all the traditions. We are going to focus in this course on the Western tradition, but this question of how to govern oneself, which form of monarchy or democracy or elite rule is the best suitable, or which form of control is desirable, when we should resist the control or the state or the authority, is something which is the central concern in political theorization and thinking. So, in their pursuit to answer these questions, political thinkers have responded to both their actual socio-historical as well as the intellectual context, and this thing which we need to understand political thought as a discipline. So, all the thinkers that we are going to discuss in this course are responding to this question of what is order, which form of order is desirable or ideal order, and in responding to these answers, they have responded to one, their own socio-historical context. So, Plato was responding to the decadness that was happening in the Greek city states. Hobbes was responding to the English Civil War. So was Locke and Rousseau to formulate a more accountable and responsible form of government. So, all of these thinkers, while responding to the question of what is government, are responding to their actual socio-historical context, and in responding to those social actual historical context, they are also responding to the intellectual context, and that respond to the intellectual context makes or shapes political thought historically and form a tradition. So, we will discuss that how Aristotle is responding to Plato, how Hobbes is being responded by Locke and Rousseau, Hegel is responded by Marx, and these conversation and argumentation and counter argumentation over the century, over the millennia, formulate what is called political thought in a particular tradition. And the nature of political thought in that sense is for a very long time historical. However, in the contemporary times we also talk about the global political thought or the comparative political thought, but political thought as a discipline by and large, and this point we are going to discuss again in the next lecture, is the historical. So, there is historicity to studying political thought in any tradition, and the reason being that political thought emerge or formulate, evolve over the century, over the millennia in a tradition when the intellectuals or those who are involved in thinking, theorization about the political challenges of their time not just respond to their own immediate socio-historical context, but also the intellectual context in which they were writing, they were reflecting, they were theorizing about the political problems. So, in this way political thinking or thought is far from conclusive and unanimous, as we shall see later while discussing about the thoughts or the key themes in many political thinkers which we have included in this course. So, while they are responding to their socio-historical context or intellectual context, does not make that there is a kind of unanimous or settled answer to the political problems. There is the huge disputations, differences, and these disputations and differences led to the political thought and the history of political thought in any tradition, and makes the study of political so fascinating discipline. So, there is no unanimous or settled answer to the problem of the political. However, we often find them more often than not speaking to each other, and that is how political thought, or for that matter any thought, grows or evolve over the century and even millennia. So, as I have said that the political thought as a discipline emerged out of these kind of thinking and theorization and having conversation across the ages from the ancient to the modern times. So, what is political thought? So, political thought as a discipline, as I have said, is historical. So, the nature of this subject is the historical. So, when we talk about political thought, we necessarily mean how it evolved over the period of centuries or even millennia. So, political thought engaged with numerous political treatises within a tradition or across the tradition, and by tradition I mean we have now a kind of settled understanding of constituting this tradition, and this is for the heuristic purpose, that is for the purpose of study. You do not have to take it as a kind of unanimous discourse or theorization about the politics. So, within tradition there are so many complexities, contradictions or contestations that is there. However, broadly speaking, for the purpose of understanding, for the purpose of study, we divide the political thought in terms of tradition and also in terms of temporality, and we often divide it say into Chinese political thought or Indian political thought, African political thought, Arab and Western tradition of political thought. So, this is merely for the purpose of having a kind of comparative understanding of political thought in different tradition, but that does not mean within Indian, Arab or Chinese tradition there is a kind of unanimity or there is a kind of coherence in political thinking and theorization. So, within tradition there are many so to speak traditions, but for the purpose of understanding we divide political thought geographically in terms of Chinese, Arab, African and Western tradition of political thought, and also temporally into ancient or classic tradition of political thought, medieval and modern political thought. So, this is also a kind of temporal division of political thought across the ages from the classical antiquity to modern times. In the recent years there have been, as I have said, a growing interest in the study of comparative political thought or political thought across the tradition and global political thought. So, that is the recent development in thinking about political thought. However, for a very long time when we discuss in the academic disciplines about the political thought, it is the Western political thought which dominated, but over the years Indian, Arab, Chinese and African, and now there is a kind of increasing interest in thinking across the tradition and develop a broader, much more comparative and complex understanding of the political rather than any kind of simplistic, narrow and restricted sense of the political. Keeping in mind these different traditions of political thought and their temporal division, in this course we are going to discuss, as the title of this course suggests, Western political thought, and it is just one of the many other traditions of political thought, as I have said, Chinese, Indian and African. However, the major ideas and concepts that shape the political discourse in the modern world, whether we discuss about the state, sovereignty, citizenship, political obligation, justice, order, you find that when we discuss about these ideas or these concepts, these are embedded in the political treatises produced in the Western tradition. So, as I said that political thinking and theorization is not something unique to the Western tradition. There are Indian, Chinese, Arab tradition of political thought. However, the modern discourse on politics are dominated by the concepts and ideas that has its roots in the Western tradition of political thought. So, thus Western political of thought remains important tradition of political thinking and theorization, and we will discuss in this course how it has evolved. Separated by centuries, even millennia, political thinkers in the Western tradition have developed a common language or set of concepts to engage with the political problems, and which we study over the course of 12 weeks, that how these thinkers together shape the understanding of political and distinguishing political from the other realms of human life, and the set of ideas that we find in Plato constantly shapes the thinking of major other political thinkers in medieval and also in the modern times. So, Plato and Aristotle in Greek city states were arguing about the nature and forms of ideal polis and city states. Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau laid the foundation for the emergence of modern political thought. So, we cannot think of modern political thought without engaging with the thoughts of Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau. Similarly, the political thought of Machiavelli is a reflection of political problems in the late medieval and early modern era. Mill, Kant, Hegel and Marx, while reflecting upon the political challenges of their times, we are also engaging with the political philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, and that is how political thought in a particular tradition evolve. So, as I said, they are responding to the immediate challenges of their time, but in responding to those they are also having a conversation with the political thinking and theorization that happened before, and that is a kind of link that we can find from Plato in the Greek city states to James Mill, Hegel, Kant in the modern European political thinking and theorization. So, in this fashion there is a unbroken conversation between and among these political thinkers, and political ideas from one era are passed on and modified to meet the requirements of another era, and in this fashion the political ideas of the past becomes part of the political consciousness of the later generation. So, what political treatises and theorization is there in Plato and Aristotle helps in thinking about the political thought in the modern times, and that is how the ideas and concepts from one generation moves and shapes the thinking of the next generation. However, while they think about their times, they not just go back to Plato and Aristotle, but also expand the boundary of political thinking or the understanding of the political, and that is how political thought has evolved. Now, if we look at these some of the questions like political philosophy, political thought and political theory. So, in the discipline of political science, the political thought is central. So, whether it is the politics in any country, say Indian politics or US politics or comparative politics or political theory and political philosophy, you find they all discuss about the politics or the political problems, but the language, the vocabulary, the concepts and the terms they use to make sense of politics or interpret the politics or provide better solution to the challenges that a country or a society face, they rely on the political thought and the political theorization. So, the connecting ground among the political philosopher, thinker, theorist or those who are experts in the political development in a particular country, say Indian politics or US politics, they are all discussing about the politics, but while discussing about the politics, they rely on the concepts, ideas, terms that is produced by these political thinkers. So, political thought in that sense plays a very significant role in the discipline of political science. Political thought as a discipline share a lot and often used, however, interchangeably with political philosophy. And philosophy, as you know, is regarded as the foundation of all knowledge. So, in any discipline, the philosophy is regarded as the ultimate source of knowledge about the object. It is true in the natural science, so it is true in the social science. So, it deals with the highest truth or the ultimate reality of the phenomena, natural or social or political. Political philosophy, however, deals with the question which is related to the political or the temporal or the material practical life of the community in the society at any given point of time. I do not want to go much into details about what is philosophy, but you can think of philosophy as a discipline which is consisted of logic, aesthetics, ethics, politics and metaphysics. So, briefly, what is logic? Logic is the approach or epistemology or a method of inquiring about something or producing some knowledge about something. It may be inductive, it may be deductive, it may be dialectics. So, the logic deals with the methods or the epistemology of knowledge. Aesthetics is ideal form or the beauty or truth. Ethics is the knowledge of the conduct, good conduct or bad conduct, good society or bad society. Politics deals with the ideal form of social organization, democracy, authoritarianism and so on and so forth. The metaphysics, however, is a bit complex, which deals with the ultimate reality of anything, and political philosophers deals or the philosopher deals with the metaphysics, the absolute, the ideal form of reality. So, philosophy in general consists of these 5 things: logic, aesthetics, ethics, politics and metaphysics. Political philosophy particularly engages with the question of the political, and the question of ethics and politics are at the very core of political thinking and theorization, as I have discussed in the beginning of this lecture. Over the century, within a tradition, political thinkers have tried to redefine or extend the boundary of political. So, the understanding of political, however, among the political philosophers are not settled. Political thinkers over the centuries within the tradition and across the tradition have extended the definition of the politics, and that we will discuss as we move along with the theories and text of major political thinkers in Western political thought. We can also make a quick comparison between political theory and thought. Political theory as a discipline is heavily dependent on political thought. For a very long time, it was very hard to distinguish the history of political thought from political theory, because most of the ideas, concepts, be it equality, liberty, state, sovereignty, citizenship, was derived from the political thinking and theorization in a tradition. So, Western political thought or the history of Western political thought was equated for a very long time with the question of political theory or the discipline of political theory, because the concepts, the ideas that we use to explain a society or interpret the society, particularly the normative tradition of political theory, is embedded in the history of political thought, and its major concepts and disputations have their roots in political thought or the history of political thought. However, if you look at political thought in comparison to political theory in contemporary times, political thought is something which is limited to the individual or group of thinkers and deals with their reflection or theorization about the political problem and challenges. However, political theory in contemporary times, which is not just about the normative political theory, but also exploratory or explanatory nature of political theory, which helps us making sense of political circumstances or the political problems. Political theory as a discipline in comparison to political thought, to which it is dependent for concepts, ideas and terminology, is much more systematic, broader and also generalized understanding of political situation. So, in through political theory we try to explain or interpret political phenomena by using the concepts which is derived from the political thought, but political theory helps us to have a much more broader, generalized or systematic understanding of political phenomena, whereas political thought, when we take it as a discipline, is about the reflection or inquiry of political phenomena done by individual or group of individual within a tradition. So, in that sense it is narrower, limited to the reflection or theorization of few individual, whereas theory is much more broader, generalized and systematic in terms of explaining and interpreting the political problems in any society. So, that is the differentiation between political theory and thought. However, all these three sub-disciplines like political philosophy, political thought and political theory are overlapping and deals with this question of political that you have to keep in mind. Now, if we move on to understand the concerns of political thinker, as we have discussed in the beginning of this lecture, that across the age and traditions, political philosophers engage with the questions like how to better govern ourselves, which forms of state or government is best or ideal, what is justice, how to establish order, when dissent and even revolution are permissible and justified. So, these are the questions which political thinkers across the age or tradition have grappled with, and these are essentially political questions, and in answering them there have been major disputations, as we discussed over the course of 12 weeks among the political thinkers, as to how to govern oneself, what is the ideal form of government, when dissent or even revolution is justified or permissible. In answering these questions, there have been huge differences between say Plato and Aristotle, Rousseau and Hobbes and Locke, Hegel and Kant. So, there is a disputation in answering these questions, and Sheldon Wolin has argued and characterized these modes of disputation or progression of political thought and thinking in Western tradition as continuity and innovation. Continuity in a sense, when say Plato's political thought and thinking is criticized by Aristotle. In that criticism, he is not just innovating the new meaning of the political or the new understanding of the state, but also there is a kind of continuity from the Plato, and so is true when we talk about Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau. They differ from each other. Similarly, with Karl Marx and Hegel, they differ, dispute each other's political assumptions, but in that disputation there is a kind of continuity and also innovation according to Sheldon Wolin in the Western tradition of political thought, which we will see over the course of 12 weeks. The later thinkers in this way not only revisit the question of the political, but also extend its boundary. So, for example, for Plato and Aristotle, the question of political or political sphere was different from the question concerning the householders or the slave owners. In other words, it was specific and limited to the public life in the polis or the city states. So, there is a kind of very limited, restricted understanding of political. Similarly, there had been a well established distinction in Western political thought between private sphere and the public sphere, and private sphere is considered as apolitical, and public sphere deals with the question of the political that concerns the whole society. However, in recent decades we find that this distinction between personal and political is not just questioned, but found making little sense to understand the political problems in 21st century. So, for instance, when we talk about the feminist assertions of personal is political and their questioning of the patriarchy, which differentiate between and among the male and female. So, this kind of assertion or questioning of a patriarchal order which starts from the family and permeates the other sphere of social political life questions this distinction between personal and public, personal and political, as we have seen in the Western tradition of thought. Similarly, in this era of ideological political thinking, religious or ethnic groups, liberals and the socialist, environmentalists have a very different and often conflicting conceptions of the political. Thus, political in the contemporary times seems to permeates every sphere of individual and collective lives, and still a conclusive and unanimous definition of political or understanding of political is far from settled. So, the question of the political constantly renegotiate or extend or include the newer concerns, newer subjects within its boundary, within its limit, and there are how it has evolved we are going to discuss when we will discuss different thinkers. Now, the obvious question comes, what is the significance of political thought and why should we study political thought, especially when these thinkers are long dead and they wrote in a context which is very different from our own. So, why we should worry about studying their thinking, their treatises in 21st century. So, what is the point how each one of them said, and as you know, during the positivist within the positivist paradigm, it was thought that political thought makes very little sense to explain our own reality, and we have to have more scientific, more rational, more data driven political thinking or political explanation and political interpretation. And for a very long time in 20th century, political thought was regarded as a kind of mere speculation or contemplation, have very little application in either explaining or interpreting the political times, political problems in our own time. So, obviously, the question comes is what is the significance of studying Western political thought. Now, the major reason for studying political thought is that they raised certain questions about the political which are still relevant. So, there is a kind of timelessness in the questions that they have raised, and also the method or the approaches that they have applied to identifying the problem and also responding to those problems. So, one of the reason for doing political thought is to understand those questions, those problems which are perennial problem in political science that deals with, as I said, the question of ethics and politics. Secondly, a deeper engagement with their thought help us understand critically our own assumptions and approaches to politics. So, it help us critically understand our own assumptions. Sometimes when we argue about politics or any issue that concerns the society, we are often unaware of our own subjective biases or prejudices. So, engagement with the political thought or political treatises help us understand critically our own assumptions, our own biases or prejudices when we think or theorize about the political problem of our time. So, this is the second reason why we should study political thought. So, in other words, political thought provides us a set of concepts and approaches to better understand and interpret the contentious and the complex nature of political problems in our own time and in our own society. Now, we are going to have a separate lecture on the method, but we can find while studying political thought there are different approaches. For instance, there is historical and the contextual tradition, where it is said that we can study political thought and political text in its historical context. And what is historical context, why we should do, why idea in the context is seen as the most appropriate method of studying political thought, we are going to discuss in the next class, but that is the one very dominant method and approaches to study political thought. Similarly, there is textual and interpretative tradition or a method of studying political thought. We will discuss it in some detail in the next lecture. I would like to briefly discuss about the outline of this course, and as you know, this is a 30-hour course over the course of 12 weeks and is open to the UG and PG students in social science and engineering subjects. And for this course there is no prerequisite, and therefore it is open for enrollment and registration to all of you who are interested in the study of political thought, particularly Western political thought. So, I request you and welcome you to enroll and register for this course. If you talk about the grading and the pedagogical approach to the study of Western political thought for this course, you are going to have 3 lectures in a week, and for every week there will be assignments. So, for 12 weeks you will get 12 assignments, and you are supposed to submit those assignments within the time limits, and these deadlines will be duly announced on your course web page. And the grading, the final grading for this course is divided into assignments and the final examination. So, for every weeks you will have about one assignment, and there is 25% is weightage given to the assignment, and remaining 75% is kept for the final examination. And you have to do well in both assignments and the final examination. The calculation of the marks assigned to assignment is on the basis of your best 8 assignment out of 12, and you have to have at least 10% out of that 25 and 30 out of 75 to pass this course. So, that is about the grading. Now, if we briefly look at the contents of this course, there will be introductory 2 lectures on the outline. So, we have today the first lecture on the nature of political thought, significance, methods. We will have one more lecture specifically understanding the methods and approaches to the study of political thought, and then we will move on to the political thinkers and the key themes from those thinkers. So, from Plato we will study the idea of justice, philosopher king, communism and state. Then we will move on to Aristotle, and in Aristotle we are going to focus on politics, virtue, state and citizenship. And then medieval thinker Machiavelli, which is also regarded as the precursor of the modern political thought and thinking. The concept of virtue, religion and republicanism from Hobbes, which is the regarded as the beginning of modern political thought. We will start with the human nature, political obligation and sovereignty. Then we will move on to the Locke and Rousseau, and from Locke we are going to focus on the natural rights, limited governments, dissent, and on Rousseau social contract and general will. So, these 3 thinkers, Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau, are regarded as the social contract tradition, and how they differ from each other we are going to discuss when we will discuss these 3 thinkers. And from then we will start with the Kant, the Enlightenment thinkers, and the question of enlightenment, morality, autonomy and freedom we will try to study from Kant. And then we see how Hegel move away or criticize the Kant and also carry forward the Kantian tradition in his understanding of freedom, rights and state, and then how Marx is critical of Hegel and extend the dialectics of Hegel when he talks about historical materialism, state and class. And finally, we will conclude this course by studying the political thought of John Stuart Mill and his idea of utilitarianism and particularly on liberty. So, this is basically the course outline for studying political thought. Now, if you look at the basis of including these thinkers and not including other thinkers in this course, is that they are first as the representative or the major representative of Western political thought since its classical Greek city states to modern era nation states, and they have reflected upon the central and perennial question of the political, the issue of ethics and politics, and together they help in shaping and also extending the boundary of political thought. So, the basis for including these thinkers are guided by this idea that they together represent the major treatises in the Western tradition of political thought and deals with the perennial question of political, that is ethics and politics, and together they shapes or constitute the idea of political and also extend its boundary over the century and millennia. So, this course thus is in no way a substitute to the original writings of Plato or Aristotle or Hobbes or Kant or Marx. So, that is a kind of announcement for you all that you should not consider this course as a substitute to their original writings. In fact, one of the objectives for me in this course is to encourage the interest among you to read for yourself these ageless classics, that is the original works of Plato, Aristotle, Marx, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau and all the other thinkers that we have included in this course. Now, thinkers and themes included in this course are by no means representative, exhaustive or even up to date. So, again you should not consider this course as the representative of the rich or complex tradition of political thinking or theorization in the Western tradition. There are startling absences starting from Cicero in Roman era to Saint Augustine in the medieval era, and also in the modern times we have not included many thinkers like Montesquieu, Mary Wollstonecraft, Hannah Arendt, John Rawls, Nietzsche, Michel Foucault, Martha Nussbaum and many others. So, in this sense there is the major absences from this course, but that was the limited scope that we have over the course of 12 weeks and 30 lectures to engage with some of the major thinkers who represent the political thought in Western tradition and also deals with the central perennial question of ethics and politics. And you are free to engage with these other missing thinkers like certainly Michel Foucault in our own contemporary times, so is John Rawls, Nietzsche, Hannah Arendt, Mary Wollstonecraft and Martha Nussbaum, that you can do and we can discuss it during the course of this 12 weeks. And I encourage you all to use the discussion forum to discuss any of the themes and thinkers that we have included and also those who have not included in the course, and make those discussion on the discussion forum more meaningful. And for any queries and doubts that you have, you can put it on the discussion forum and you will get immediate reply from me or from my TA within 24 hours. So, let me repeat this point. The objective of this course is to engage with the major thinkers in Western political thought and their key ideas. That is the major objective of this course. And secondly, it is hoped that such engagement with the major thinkers and their text will enable us to better understand the complexity and many-sidedness of the political debates and argumentation in our own time. So, the study of political thought is not just for a kind of antiquarian purposes or the interest in the historical times or the thinkers in their particular context, but engaging with them help us understand or better understand our own political problems and challenges, and also a kind of critical understanding of our own assumptions and biasness. So, with that hope, I hope you will find this course very interesting, and I look forward to more meaningful engagement over the course of 12 weeks. Now, for this particular lecture, you can refer to some of these books like David Butcher and Paul Kelly, Political Thinkers from Socrates to Present, Murray Forsyth and Maurice Kinshepper, A Guide to Political Classics, Plato to Rousseau, Shefali Jha, Western Political Thought from the Ancient Greeks to the Modern Times. So, these two books by Shefali Jha and David Butcher and Paul Kelly will be the book which we are going to refer to for many or most of the thinkers that we have included, but you besides them the other text that you should refer to is like J.S. McLean, B. Nelson, again very important text, Western Political Thought, Alan Rand on Politics, A History of Political Thought from Herodotus to the Present, and Sheldon Wolin, Politics and Vision, Continuity and Innovation in Western Political Thought. So, particularly for the themes on the difference between political philosophy and political thought, political theory and political thought, the subjects matter that concerns the political thinker, I will suggest you to go to the first chapter of this text by Sheldon Wolin, Politics and Vision. So, that is all for today's lecture, and I hope you enjoyed. Please do give your feedback. We will be happy to hear from you and respond to your queries and comments. I thank you for listening. Thank you all.